Well, it's time to Biden it up.
There he is.
There we go. Now, why are we saying Biden's going to Biden it up? What's going on with Biden?
Yeah.
Well, as we all know, there was a caucus last night.
Mm-hmm.
What's going on? What's the quandary with the front runner, Daniel? What is the current quandary with the DNC front runner?
Yeah.
What's going on?
So I just want to reiterate the same story I've been telling over the last 2 weeks. A year ago, everyone on mainstream media was like, oh, Joe Biden, he's going to take everything by storm. He's going to win everything, everywhere, all the time, for every single reason that there could possibly be. Bernie's going to drop out in midsummer. And then it was, 6 months ago, it's Biden's going to do really well in Iowa. And he has a firewall in South Carolina 3 months ago. Hey, some people in the campaign are saying he might have some issues in Iowa, but he still has the firewall in South Carolina. A month ago, oh, it's bad news in Iowa. Well, Biden did about as bad as he could do. Like, the only possible way he could do worse is if he lost to Amy Klobuchar, and he actually almost did. Biden almost was in 5th place in Iowa. That's going to hurt. So we have this whole thing happening where, they obviously had the whole debacle that we're still going through right now as we're recording. It's only 62% are in, blah, 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 blah. But Biden's lawyers were a big part of the delay in this response, because I think that they were even like, holy crap, we did a lot worse than we thought.
Sorry.
And this is exactly where we start. So, if you're the type of person who thinks the Democratic Party is a creaking, incompetent entity whose leadership needs overthrowing, the Iowa caucuses certainly validate your point. None of us knew who would win, but we had at least expected a result. I also want to remind everyone that Nate Silver, the math genius that he is, had Biden winning by about 40%. More than Bernie Sanders. I guess numbers aren't really his thing when it comes down to it. It's more of the what's in here that matters, or what's not here that matters. Anyway, I don't mean to make fun of the guy's hair, but I'm just a little annoyed at him. Anyway, so the state Democratic Party officials announced that due to, quote, quality control issues, something that Biden lawyers are pushing, release of the results would be indefinitely delayed. Well, we do know today that they were, again, 62% was counted and released at 4 p.m. local time here in Chicago. On a conference call with representatives of the candidate, party officials hung up the phone when asked when the totals would be released. So what do we know? Well, one thing that we can say definitely is that front-runner Joe Biden flopped. And he flopped again about as hard as one can flop when you're a front-runner. If Bernie Sanders had flopped in a similar fashion, every single cable news station would be telling him to drop out.
Right.
But wait. Let me get through the article.
All right.
So there were places where Biden didn't even meet the 15% threshold. And I remember when the caucus were happening, I kept hearing that there were places where, like, Biden had to go join, like, Buttigieg or Bernie Sanders people. Just there weren't 15%. His base just did not turn out at all. And actually, the younger vote, it was a decent turnout for people under 45, but it really does seem like the older crowd just didn't come out. And was that due to Biden being terrible? Was it due to them not being enthused because there really isn't a whole lot to grab onto him? Was it that they thought other people were going to take their spot? I don't know. We'll ask them. But so he wasn't even getting first round qualification and caucus sites. And the Attorney General of Iowa had to switch from Biden to Buttigieg when Biden was disqualified. So you have the Attorney General of Iowa, who is, of course, a Biden aficionado, as the party members are. He had to move to Buttigieg because there wasn't anyone there. Biden, doesn't matter. We're still figuring out what, Sanders is currently leading in delegates. I mean, not delegates, in popular vote. Buttigieg is basically tied with him in delegates. But don't forget, the loser of tonight, the main loser, and the person, in a sense, this is the perfect order. Like, again, if Sanders for sure wins when they finish counting. That's like literally
if they finish counting.
Yeah, it's literally the best possible outcome for Bernie Sanders, and like the second best outcome is if Pete takes first, because he's going to fall apart the second anyone that's not white decides they need to vote.
Right. So there's another thing too that we have to remember. How long has it been, Daniel? I mean, really, just think back when we first started live streaming in January. Even on the radio show, too, when there was a lot of talk in the primary, how people were promoting Joe Biden as the main front runner. Even before he even made his announcement, there was a lot of hype and propaganda around Joe Biden and his campaign and how inevitable he was and how he's going to overwhelm the people in Iowa and how his campaign is systematically going to take over. But no, the whole other narrative that we're seeing right now, what we are witnessing is the downfall of a lot of corporate media pundits that got it wrong. I'm going to say it again one more time. Corporate media pundits got it wrong, and now we're seeing something brand new. We're seeing the fact that independent media, not only us here at Heartlands Media, but other media outlets too that are not tied to corporations, we've been calling out for a very long time that Biden doesn't have what it takes, and he's going to lose. And let's say in a hypothetical scenario, he goes into the general election. He will lose to President Donald Trump. There's no debate about it. There's no conversation about it. It's over. Look at how he failed in Iowa. Look, I don't want to put on a conspiracy hat right now, but dare I say, perhaps maybe the reason why the DNC, especially in Iowa, was so hesitant to release the results because Biden did such a terrible job and his campaign did such a terrible job.
No, I mean, literally, his lawyers were a big reason that was being forced.
Right. So Paul, why don't you take it away?
Yeah, I think one of the big things to think about is because Biden has done so poorly, or at least by all accounts, from what we know of the stuff from this debacle.
Who knows? Maybe.
So who knows, right?
Of the 38% of votes, maybe they're all for Biden, and we just don't know.
I mean, by all accounts of what information is publicly available at this point, it looks like Biden has done really, really horribly. And because all of these results are so much sort of in question, like, and may continue to be for quite a while, I think the question really becomes what happens in the rest of the race? Who does this help? Who does this hurt? And it's like, yeah, Biden may be in a position of like getting out of the race sooner than I expected. Yeah. I think that may favor Daniel. But also,
don't worry,
I think
for non-financial reasons, kind of indirectly.
Right. But pizza. I mean, pizza.
Yeah. Pizza.
Hey, remember, time is money, and you can measure.
Hold on, but there's something I want to mention though, because like there's a bet that we did here at Heartlands Media about pizza.
Do we remember what date it was? I want to look through the video archive, but I actually don't want to look through the video archive.
But
right.
there's a little caveat. See, I'm already out, but see, Paul, he's
by the way, this is before Biden entered the race. We made this bet.
So Paul said that Biden would be out by Super Tuesday, right?
After Super Tuesday.
And Daniel said by after
New Hampshire.
Yeah.
Now, I said that he wouldn't enter into his race because he failed not once but twice in 2 presidential races. Biden, look, granted, I already lost that bet, but Biden, you should have listened to me. You should not have gotten in this presidential race because you're going to lose again.
I disagree,
I'm so sorry.
I disagree. If he hadn't gotten in the race, Buttigieg would have won Iowa.
Well...
But my point, though, was more than just Biden. How does this affect the rest of the race? Who are the big winners and big losers? And I think Pete Buttigieg is probably going to be a big loser because so much of Iowa will remain in question, and he sort of put all his eggs in the Iowa basket. Like, he doesn't do as well.
Not the brown eggs. They're specifically white eggs.
Mayo white. There we go. Mayo white.
Okay.
Salad?
Yeah.
Also, Tulsi Gabbard, I think, will do pretty well because she sort of put a lot of her eggs in New Hampshire, which now sort of gets seen as the first result that people will say is not contentious.
Hopefully.
Right?
Hopefully
the first result that people will look at of giving momentum. Now, this may hurt Bernie Sanders, even though he's tied for first in delegates in Iowa, based on what we know so far for the 62% of the votes that they've reported. And it may continue that way, that it remains relatively tied, or it may change. Who knows? But ultimately, it removes that narrative of if he wins Iowa and New Hampshire. That was, I mean, every like Bernie has a path to victory argument started with looks like he's doing well in Iowa and New Hampshire. And if he wins Iowa and New Hampshire, and it's like, well, you didn't win Iowa. You didn't win Iowa because blah, 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 blah. It was so crazy that you have to scrap that. So you don't. Where's your path now? You said you needed Iowa and New Hampshire. You don't have Iowa. You don't have Iowa. You don't have Iowa. Like, okay.
Well,
So there-
well,
there's
you know
gonna
what?
be that.
Technically, he kind of does because his campaign was ready for this.
Right, but
They're
we're going
lo-
to get dragged into that does he or doesn't he have Iowa conversation rather than he's winning here, he's winning here, he's winning here.
Yeah.
It's gonna effectively deflate momentum that he
There's
could
no
otherwise
question
have.
it will, but personally, here at Heartlands Media, we think people are people, and we don't think delegates are people. Well, delegates could also be people.
It could also change that perception. The more people say, yeah, Iowa looks like there was some shenanigans going on, and it looks like it was institutional shenanigans, and it looks like it may have been specifically against, I don't know, the one really obviously actually anti-institution, anti-democratic establishment person who is a
Right.
candidate in this race. And if people draw that conclusion, which at this point may be a little bit speculative, but if people draw that conclusion, it could help Bernie in later races as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and Bernie has momentum, and again, so that's what I was saying, that I'm not too worried about Pete because he has, like, I mean, you said it, Paul. He put everything on a clean victory in Iowa, and even if he squeaks out ahead in delegates and vote, it's not clean. It's no longer clean, and he's not going to win New Hampshire with that. It's not going to shift momentum. It's basically people are going to come away with, well, it looks like Buttigieg and Bernie are doing really well.
There's also something else we got to take away from this, and that is, looking back at 2016 at the Republican primary, Ted Cruz won the Iowa primary against Trump. Like, he was the number one guy who won that. And the thing is, just because Pete Buttigieg put all his eggs in one basket, I think both of you brought up a very good point. Like, this is an epic disaster for Pete, no matter what, and especially going into Super Tuesday. Let's look at Pete Buttigieg's record. Right now, he made the mistake. Last night, he made the mistake of saying that he was the winner of last night. But he shot himself in the foot because now all attention is going to be on Pete Buttigieg. And the more people find about Pete Buttigieg, very similar to Joe Biden, the more people who know about them, well, they're going to realize that this person is not who they say they are. There's a lot of skeletons in Pete Buttigieg's closet, very similar to Joe Biden, and he will suffer and eventually lose like how Joe Biden did.
I'd be careful to not dig our heels in too much on that because I certainly see the counterpoints to that, and there are going to be a lot of people who will say the exact opposite, that this was not a big loss for Pete Buttigieg, that he put all of his resources in here. He didn't come away with a win, and also instead came away with a lot of baggage and a lot of new questions about, his character and the way he's running his race. The way we see it,
Right.
a lot of people will be like, look, we didn't think he was going to tie for first. We just thought he was in fourth, but he tied for first. A lot of people will see that as a big win for Buttigieg.
I'm actually perfectly fine if I see that this way because, again, from my point of view, the most important thing that needed to happen in Iowa is Joe gets slapped across the face. If Pete wins, I'm not too concerned. In fact, I would actually relish Biden people moving over to Pete because, again, Pete has a very short runway, and his plane still doesn't have wings.
All right.
Bernie Sanders has wings, a cabin, everything else you need to take off in the later states. The person who later we have to worry about is Bloomberg, who is going to directly compete with Pete in a way that won't be with Biden. And again, Biden voters, their number one second choice, Bernie Sanders.